Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another commentary. We will work together on the letters on occult meditation. I think at some point, too, you will join us, too, perhaps when we get into the area of the Deva kingdom. This is an amazing book. We know that the Tibetan contacted Alice Bailey for the first time on November the 19th, 1919. And yet the book was not published until 1950. Of course, the students in the school were able to benefit from these lessons, but they were gathered together for a later publication. What it looks like here, unless this was published in 1922 as well, 1950 is the first copyright date. But since copyrights last 28 years, we could subtract 28 from 1950 and maybe 1922. I think the initiation, Human and Solar, was first copywritten in 1922. We'll have to check that, but that was one of the first books. These are letters with quite a bit of really deep occultism, real profundity, I would say. And sometimes they hold the key to understanding what is given much later in the process of books. Well, we're beginning with the moon in Gemini. Let's see where we're beginning. It might be interesting to take a look. At least it's here in Finland. And Scorpio is rising, and the moon is with Venus in Gemini. But really, if we go forward, actually, the time is, yeah. Let's go forward by one hour, and we'll see what that brings us, because right now this is 16:31 and 22 seconds Eastern European time, and it's actually, if we look at Eastern European Daylight Time, it should be 17, but still Scorpio will be rising. And an X-ray, well, that would be a good symbol for penetrating into the depths of this book. Mercury will be in Cancer, and Mars in Aries. The moon will have just moved beyond Rigel, the star of education, in the constellation of Orion. And yes, Mars in Aries, having moved beyond Chiron. Yes, and basically, you know, we may be giving this a fair amount of psychological treatment. So let's see where it takes us as we begin to work together. let's see, this is guests are reading in the library of a luxurious home. Well, this is the 26th degree of Cancer. And certainly great libraries have been consulted in bringing these books together. And it looks like Saturn is opposing the Sun, giving us some rigor, and also Pluto, also Jupiter. They're all in the sign Capricorn, opposing the Sun. So let us see what we can gather from the book. And I just realized, of course, that, yeah, you have to be able to see the chart. And sometimes I do forget that. There it is, the Scorpio rising sign, the X-ray, the trine from the Sun in Cancer to the ascendant, the Moon near the star of education, Rigel, and Venus there too, in its esoteric rulership position, and Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter conjunct the heliocentric Earth, and then naturally opposed, geocentrically opposed to the Sun. And we have as well Mars in Aries. So maybe we can, after all, get on with it. Okay. Now, let's see here. All right. So this says received and edited by Alice Bailey. 2 copyrights, 1950, 1978. It will be ripe for the copyright to continue, and maybe 2004. Dedicated to the Tibetan teacher who wrote these letters and authorized their publication. The following letters were received during the period included within the dates May 16th, 1920 and October 20th, 1920. So approximately 6 months, with the exception of 2 letters, the 2 letters which were received in 1919, I suppose, just a little bit after he contacted her for the first time, because there was not much left of the year 1919 when he did contact her, November 19th. With the consent of their author, they have been gathered together for publication. They are published in full as received, with the exception of certain parts which have a purely personal application, maybe to Alice Bailey herself, and those having reference to a certain occult school, maybe the arcane school, and those of a prophetic or esoteric nature which may not now be communicated. Now that's a very interesting thought. Let me make a little adjustment here and possibly get a little more Well, not much more light. So, I don't think I had read that before. Eager to plunge into the book, I did long ago, and did not see what had been removed. Personal items and items probably related to the organizing of the arcane school, I guess, and those of a prophetic esoteric nature, which, who knows, have they been communicated in any of the other books? Not certain. It is hoped that those who read these letters will endeavor to do two things. This is Alice Bailey writing. And let's see here. I'm doing my best to make an adjustment. Sometimes the desk gets a little crowded. Well, number one, read with an open mind, remembering that the truth is a many-sided diamond and that its different aspects will appear at different times, as those who guide the race see a need which must be met. Okay, well, this applies, of course, to all the reading that is connected with the books that Alice Bailey wrote down for the Tibetan. Read with an open mind, and it says read always with an open mind, and do not shun what is unfamiliar. Well, by now the readers of these books pretty well have adopted that attitude. Many books on meditation have been written, some too abstruse and some too superficial to satisfy the average educated man. The writer of these letters has apparently attempted to supply the need of a brief yet scientific exposition of the rationale of meditation, emphasizing the goal immediately ahead and the intermediate stages. And point 2 here, judge of the letters on their merits and not upon claims put forth on behalf of the writer. Well, Alice Bailey really is making no claims. And the Tibetan, when he introduced to her the possibility of working with himself, he also made no claims. He said, take a look at what I'm going to offer and see if it appeals to you and whether you see value in working with me. And at first, after an initial kind of rejection, saying basically, I'm no darn psychic, she did accept. Thank goodness for all of us that she did accept to work with him for 30 years. She was on loan then, you might say, from Master K.H.'s ashram. And Master K.H. was also, in a sense, the master of Master D.K., the Christ himself being the still greater master of Master D.K. So he doesn't want to say who he is, at this point, and even the revelation that he was the Tibetan or is the Tibetan Djwhal Khul, came rather as an accident because of some writing that Alice Bailey had inadvertently left on the bottom of a page. So for this reason, that the letters should be judged on their merits and not on claims, for this reason, he, the Tibetan, has chosen to preserve his anonymity and has requested the recipient of the letters to publish them under his pseudonym. Well, they have so many of the pseudonyms. I suppose the word the Tibetan is a pseudonym for Djwhal Khul, but I've also heard that Djwhal Khul itself is a pseudonym for yet another more authentic name. If the subject matter and the letters, if the subject matter of the letters is of value, it will call forth a response from the readers and serve to help some onwards towards the goal and prove to many the inspiration and aid it already has to a few. So let's bring in this idea. And the whole idea of anonymity is announced here, the reason for it, so that we do not speak with bated breath of Master Djwhal Khul as an authority and therefore believe everything written because an authority wrote it. Most all the books have this statement from an extract by the Tibetan, and he basically tells us that we are only to believe if we are fully convinced by the intuition that belief is a correct attitude towards that which is written. So this was written then in New York in 1922. Okay. Yeah. It may be that I was muted for a little while there. So we're looking at the constitution of man. And it says C figure, but the figure really isn't there. And maybe in the book it is there. But we have been dealing with such maps as we have studied in the other books. And as I was saying, some students have colored in these maps in a way that has given us even further indication of their value. There we go. So we're familiar with these ideas that the monad is the pure spirit, and it's considered that aspect of ourselves, which is the Father in heaven. And I guess, let's see here. Maybe we can find that, let's see if there are other windows here, possibly. I think what we need to do then is just pause for a second while I bring in those other windows. Well, here I hope we have it in this map as we describe the monad, which is found as a triangle on the monadic or second plane. And each one of these planes, especially the 4 etheric levels of the monadic plane, every plane has its etheric and its dense levels, have a particular type of importance, some of which Master D.K. has indicated in the book, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. So monad, spiritual triad, Atma, Buddhi, and higher Manas, the abstract mind, and then what we call the soul on the level of higher mind, and then the personality on the lower 18 subplanes. Okay. So the monad is the pure spirit. Really, there's only one monad in all of cosmos, but it is subdivided through the act of emanation, which is a type of ever-lessening self-perception on the part of the one universal logos. And this aspect reflects the 3 aspects of the Godhead: will or power, that's the Father; the love wisdom, which is the Son; and the active intelligence, which is the Holy Spirit. And I think we can see that here. This is the Father, this is the Son, the wisdom aspect here, and then the Holy Spirit is the active, intelligent aspect. All of this, of course, seems old hat in a way to us because we've been studying these matters, but have we really experienced these levels or these points of tension? Every point of tension, according to its intensity, is revelatory of certain types of phenomena, certain types of spiritual impacts and events. So this monad is contacted really only at the final initiations, when man is nearing the end of his journey and is perfected. Some degree of contact seems to occur at the 3rd initiation. And then at the 4th, there is a much more direct mode of contact. And at the 5th, still more. And finally, one, in a sense, becomes that monad at the 6th initiation and is liberated from the monadic temple, the temple of Ezekiel at the 7th initiation. And on it goes until a place is found within the 3 aspects of divinity on the 7th or highest plane of the cosmic physical plane, in the sea of fire. And it is then the monad itself which is making the great journey on the way of higher evolution. So we note the word reflection. The monad reflects itself. Again, in Roman numeral 2 here, the ego, higher self or individuality. Now we notice that this is not taking us at first simply to the level of higher mind. This ego, this higher self, this individuality is really the spiritual triad. And we are given the quality of the 3rd cosmic subplane, spiritual will. We call it Atma, not Atman, but Atma. Then we have the intuition, which is Buddhic love wisdom. We call it the Christ principle. That's the 4th cosmic subplane. And then the higher or abstract mind. Well, not all levels of the higher mind here, but on the very first subplane of the cosmic subplane of mind, we find the abstract mind or higher manas. So the true ego, maybe I can put that down here. The true ego is the spiritual triad. And I don't know, maybe that should be in capitals. I realize that this is, for many of us, a review. But what is necessary is to experience the type of consciousness or awareness which accompanies these levels of tension. Higher points of tension bring higher relations, higher impacts. And when we think of a point of tension as focused, immovable will, then we realize that that will deflects so many lesser types of impacts and reveals the nature of the impacts that are connected specifically with that point of tension. A point of tension, for instance, on the atmic plane will reveal far more than a point of tension on the Buddhic plane, and that will reveal more than a point of tension on the higher mental plane or lower mental plane, and so it goes. Points of tension have their own type of revelation appropriate to the point of tension. Maybe the most important thing here is to realize that what we call the soul really is the spiritual triad. The soul is the spiritual triad. And we build the Antakarana at a certain point of our development. Intuition is, we build the Antakarana and it admits us into the province of the true ego, the true soul, the spiritual triad? Well, really the term soul, of course, can apply to any point of tension above the higher mental plane or above the lower mental plane, really. There is a type of consciousness which accompanies every point of tension. And that type of consciousness is soul. So monad has soul, and greater beings in our cosmos have soul as well. There is a soul aspect, a consciousness aspect, even for the logos of this particular universe that we can call the universal logos, so far beyond our comprehension as simply to be words. But we must assume that such a great being exists in its beingness, in its consciousness, and in the type of activity which it generates out of itself, an activity which we can describe as emanation and the interactions of all that is emanated. The ego, maybe this ego in this particular case, begins to make its power felt in advanced men, and increasingly on the probationary path, which is the path before real accepted discipleship, until by the third initiation, the control of the lower self by the higher is perfected, and the highest aspect begins to make its energy felt. That is the monad. At the third initiation of glorification or transfiguration, the highest aspect of man, the monad, begins to make its power, its presence felt. And in this particular case, he may be speaking of, when speaking of the ego, he may mean what we usually call the soul in the causal body. Because that is an aspect of ego, it's the sort of lowest vessel of the ego. In other words, it sort of contains the spiritual triad and makes that triad effective on the lower or personal planes. So this term ego is quite protean. Maybe if it's all in capital letters, it could mean the monad itself. And then the spiritual triad, we're told here, is the ego, because Atma, Buddhi, and Manas are the ego. Maybe for intuition here, I should just write the word Buddhi. That would be consistent. And then the ego is also that which we consider to be the consciousness within the causal body, the consciousness within the egoic lotus, as it's called. And then in modern psychology, when we use the word ego, and usually with a little e, we're simply meaning the personality and a person's estimation of their own identity as the personality. So it has a number of different levels to it, this term ego. Now, we're interested in being able to focus our consciousness within the causal body, within the egoic lotus, and consciously so. And then through the building of the Antakarana, we're interested in first being able to receive the impression from the spiritual triad, and eventually, like the masters, focus our attention within the different levels of the spiritual triad. For Atma and Buddhi, never all the way up, because the very highest subplane of the Atmic and Buddhic systemic planes are the province of beings who have passed beyond the initiation of mastership. And so we're not going to attain those levels, but we may be able to receive some modified impression from them. As far as receiving modified impression from the monad, or transformed or attenuated impression from the monad, as stated here, it begins at the third initiation, but it's certainly not in any degree of fullness. It's not imparted in any degree of fullness. And of course, all of these are words, but we want to increasingly have the experience. So he doesn't really so much talk about the causal body here, the sort of vehicle of the spiritual triad considered as the ego and embodied in the egoic lotus. He's not talking about that here, but he does so much teaching about it in the other books that we have to include it. The ego reflects itself in, and here we can mean either the triad or the causal body, egoic lotus. It reflects itself in, number 3, the personality, correlated with the third aspect of divinity. It reflects itself in the personality or lower self, the physical plane man. Well, physical plane in this sense that the lower 18 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane represent the dense physical body of the planetary logos. And whereas, as I've often said, the lower 21 subplanes represent the dense physical body of the solar logos. So this aspect also is threefold. We look at a number of threefold presentations. This will make 9 altogether, 9 being a number associated with the third ray. So we have a mental body, the lower 4 subplanes of the systemic mental plane. We have an emotional body, which is unitary and not divided, as is our mental body. And we have a physical body, which does include the 4 higher subplanes of the etheric physical plane. In other words, the systemic etheric body. So this, is a picture of the personality, these lower 18 subplanes, and the chakras or vortices, which have their origin really as far as the cosmic physical plane is concerned, on very high levels up here in the sea of fire, are basically reflected in the lower ethers. And who knows where these vortices really begin. I suspect that they begin on such high planes, revealed by such high points of tension, that the Tibetan has never illustrated them. Cosmos is said to have 10 dimensions. It suggests kind of the Kabbalah, with 3 above and 7 below. And we would have to go to the very height, symbolically speaking, of the universe to find these, the origin of the vortices, which show up as the chakras on the etheric, astral, and mental levels. There will be vortices on the Buddhic, atmic, and monadic and logoic levels, but they are not illustrated here. And the way we can determine that such vortices exist is that from the statement that 35 vortices of fire make the perfected adept. That's the master. So that's 5 times 7, and then 2 planes are left out of the picture. The 6th from below and the 7th from below, which are basically the 2nd from above and the 1st from above. And we have to think that these vortices of fire on the monadic and logoic planes distinguish respectively the Chohan of the 6th initiation, and then finally the Chohan of the 7th initiation, such as the Christ is now becoming and the Buddha is now becoming. It looks like it takes a while to pass through the 6th degree and or prepare for the 7th degree. Again, for us, just words. We have other experiences to that we have to pass through before those words can be really meaningful. Now, what about meditation? The aim of meditation is, therefore, to bring man to the realization of the egoic aspect, whether we're speaking more conventionally of the soul on the higher mental plane, we call it that, or whether we're speaking of the spiritual triad as the true ego. So go to Cosmic Fire, page 176 and 177, and you'll see the treatment there of the triad as the true ego. So to bring a man to the realization of the egoic aspect and to bring the lower nature under its control, this is the immediate goal for the average man. DK tells us we should all consider ourselves to be average aspirants and disciples. Otherwise, we fall into the heresy of separateness, and we wrongly distinguish ourselves from others, separating from them, rather than seeing our unity. So that seems to be the little introduction here, and it doesn't say who wrote this section on the Constitution of Man. The Alice Bailey signature comes above it, and the Tibetan signature does not come below it. it's probably, well, I can't say what it probably is. Could be the editor, could be the Tibetan. But anyway, this first letter is definitely the Tibetan at work. And sometimes the dates in which on which the letter was written are given. At least in this version, this first letter does not appear to have those dates. But as she said, most were received during 6 months in the year 1920. That's 100 years ago. And a couple of them were received in 1919. So, you wonder, since we're so used to a rapid turnover in literature, how this old writing, relatively old, can still be of value. But then, if we're wise about it, we realize how long ago the Bhagavad Gita was written, and how it's one of those books that DK insists we should have close to us, as well as the Viveka Kudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination by Shankara, as well as the New Testament. And look at the Yoga Sutras. Were they written more than maybe even 10,000 years ago? So the age of a writing does not indicate that it is necessarily superseded. But using the Agni Yoga term light-minded, that doesn't mean subject to light, it means a bit frivolous. Light-minded people tend to think that everything must ever be written at the current time, and that even a century is too old to make a writing of value in the present moment. We know that that is a fallacious way of looking at the value of various writings. So, I think the best thing to do is to treat the Tibetans' writing as one big book, parts of which had to be released to the public at different times. Everything written down, including the works of Alice Bailey by herself, but certainly the works of the Tibetan, all aspect each other. They all bear upon each other. They all shed light upon each other. And from the study of any particular book and its contents, we can arrive at any other of the books that he has written and their contents. So we have to be able to navigate this great sphere of knowledge, this great sphere of teaching, so we can move easily from one point to another point. And when we can do that, we are closing in on developing the faculty of pure reason. Maybe he doesn't say so much about pure reason, but he does talk about inclusive reason in the late 300s of the second psychology book, Esoteric Psychology 2. And to be able to do this, as I've said, is the blending of Mercury and Jupiter. So out of all the many pathways between this item of information and that item of information, the many, many pathways ruled by Mercury, a wholeness can be created by Jupiter, which is also a planet of vision and intuition. Neptune is involved there as well in this Buddhic apprehension, but Neptune has more to do with the love, wisdom quality, and it sort of reveals the sameness of all the points of information that we are combining as a whole under Jupiter and have identified under Mercury. Those are three Buddhic planets. And if we are cautious in our development here, we will find that our mental studies will lead inevitably to something other, lead to something more intuitive. Maybe I can show you, I think, an important statement. All I have to do is find it, you know. And it's in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1. And maybe around page 202, a little bit later. And here it is. It's about the second ray approach. And what is said here is the student on this ray, which is DK's ray, at least his soul ray, is ever unsatisfied with his highest attainments. No matter how great his knowledge, his mind is still fixed on the unknown, the beyond, and the heights as yet unscaled. And then down here, we're talking about the method of approaching the path. And it says here, the characteristic method of approaching the path for this second ray type, which many of us are, at least either in our soul or monad, the characteristic method of approaching the path would be by close and earnest study of the teachings till they become so much a part of man's consciousness as no longer to be merely intellectual knowledge, but a spiritual rule of living, thus bringing in the intuition and true wisdom. And, you know, let me make that even a bit brighter, even if the color is not quite the right one. They become so much a part of man's consciousness as to be no longer intellectual, merely intellectual knowledge. So this is this transition that I was talking about from Manas to Buddhi. And that will at least give us the page number. If you cover the page number with red, you know, it just doesn't show up. So, and you know, there's no perfection necessarily just because you have a ray with which many good things are associated, including the approach of the Christ, because he says there are bad types here, and a bad type of the second ray, because, you know, you can take that first and second initiation on the second ray line even before you make a choice between the right-hand path and the left-hand path. So a bad type of the second ray would be bent on acquiring knowledge for himself alone, absolutely indifferent to the human needs of others. The foresight, this is with the second ray, and it relates to Jupiter, a planet of foresight and anticipatory vision. The foresight of such a man would degenerate into suspicion, his calmness into coldness and hardness of nature. So I'm going to just kind of point this out as long as we're here. I can't do too much writing in here as I used to be able to do, but maybe it's a good thing it does protect the original statements. So our studies in this book, which may seem quite mental in a certain respect, actually lead to a combination of Venus and Mercury, which we can call Manus Buddhi or Buddhi Manus. They will take us into the abstract mind, which is in many respects Mercurian and is the lowest part of the spiritual triad and has much that is Uranian about it, since Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, and it is revelatory, let us say, of the great patterns of thought. But it will also lead us into the realm of Neptune, Jupiter, and Mercury, and lead us into the realm, finally, for the spiritual will of Saturn and Vulcan. So we want to be able to center within the ego, at least within the causal body, and to be successful in meditation because we can accomplish that type of centering. So many people cannot. If I say to you or myself, okay, let us now center within our egoic lotus causal body, what will we do? How will we know when we have arrived? I've often thought that entering the realm of our accumulated virtue and identifying it is a way of centering within the egoic lotus. But when we start to center, as the higher initiates do, within the true ego or spiritual triad, then we enter not just the transpersonal realm of the egoic lotus, but something that is truly planetary and impersonal. The planetary will, the planetary heart, and the planetary mind. And we will learn how to do that if we follow the right type of occult meditation. I am remembering that Alice Bailey said, well, some people are studying so much, they never really learn how to meditate. So we have to keep some kind of ongoing balance between these factors of, meditation related to the first ray, study related to the second ray, and service related generically to the third ray. If we don't have a balance in this triangle, we will never really be able to serve in a way that is truly useful in a rounded out manner to the spiritual hierarchy. And usually it's our meditative life that is deficient. And so perhaps this book is going to teach us something. I mean, the many writings of DK have already taught us a lot, but perhaps this book is going to teach us something about how to truly meditate in an occult manner. There are so many different ways of meditating, and they have different results, and some of those results are not necessarily good at all, not necessarily useful for workers with the divine plan as we hope that we become. So that's kind of an introduction here to the book, not a lengthy one. And in our next program number 2, we will get into the first letter from the Tibetan, the alignment of the ego with the personality. And, you know, we have to be careful about this word ego. Its spelling is not always revelatory of what the Tibetan means. And he does use the term for egoic lotus causal body, and he clarifies that the spiritual triad is even more so the ego or truer soul, but he doesn't always reference the triad until a later degree of development, maybe around the second initiation, when the antakarana can be built. It's a Mercurian type of activity, quite strongly so, and there are certain ways when dealing with the preparation for the second initiation and using the sign Scorpio, that Mercury can be applied to preparing the consciousness for the building of the antakarana, which then goes on and on and on, and turns from the individual antakarana leading to the monad to the planetary antakarana joining it, leading to Venus and probably to the sun and to other destinations of which we cannot be certain, but ending at last the whole antakaranic bridge of return, ending at last within the universal logos on its own plane, whatever that may be. Okay, so we've dealt a little bit with the introduction here, and we're eager to get into letter 1 whenever that may be possible. And so this is the end of letters on occult, letters on occult meditation, the loom, the weaver, video commentary. Program 1, about an hour or so, a little more. And our date is the 17th of July, 1920. And we will have next the beginning of Letters on Occult Meditation, video commentary, program, 2, page, well, what is it, page 0. Okay, page 0, and we don't know how far we go yet. And here we are up to page 0. This little letter, it looks like it goes for about 8 pages. So we'll work on that, always remembering that the foundation of later developments can be found as essential to understanding those later developments. So many times I've had to look back to letters on occult meditation or to initiation human and solar to find a missing piece of information without which I could not understand the apparently more advanced work that I was reading about later in the Tibetans' offerings of books. Okay, friends, so that'll be it for the moment. And much love, many blessings, and we're undertaking a new study. As I say to you, we'll probably join me here at certain points for certain subjects. And, you know, my goal would be to offer as many of these video commentaries on the books as I could. I've done a lot that is simply written commentary, and it's quite exacting. But I think the video commentaries are faster at this stage of my life. And they offer a different method of absorption, as you can listen to them when you're driving, walking, or whatever, because you're getting 2 things: the Tibetans writing word for word, and you're getting what another fellow student thinks of what he has written after years of study, so that may be useful to you as well. So all the best, and we will go on shortly. Maybe. Maybe it'll be today, if it doesn't run into the webinar on the secret doctrine. We'll talk to you later, and bye for now.